John Martin had always appreciated the calm and quiet of his farm. Nestled in the rolling hills of a small rural town, his property was a haven of peace. The tall corn stalks and healthy crops that stretched for acres, the hum of bees on a warm afternoon, and the occasional chirp of birds were all the sounds he needed. He loved his privacy. After all, a man who worked from dawn to dusk in the fields deserved his moments of solitude. But that quiet life was beginning to change. It all started with the buzzing sound in the sky. At first, John thought it was just a passing noise, something from a neighbor's work, maybe a lawnmower or some sort of machinery. But as the days went by, the buzzing grew louder, and it became clear that it wasn't just any farm machinery. It was something higher up. John squinted into the sky one bright morning, shielding his eyes from the sun. His heart sank as he saw it, a small hovering object flying over his land. It was a drone, a black, sleek drone that zoomed around in wide circles, seemingly focused on something below. John had no idea who was flying it, but he didn't like it. He shook his head and went back to work. But the drone didn't stop. Day after day it returned, buzzing above him, flying low over the crops and cattle. It was a constant presence, always hovering just far enough to stay out of reach, but close enough to be a nuisance. John didn't mind company much, but he didn't want any unwanted attention on his farm. He had his routine, and he didn't need some random person spying on him. Yet the drone persisted. Soon John realized that the person flying the drone wasn't just a random passerby. The drone appeared to be making its rounds over his property at the same time every day, usually around mid-afternoon. John's frustration grew. He didn't know who it was, but someone, somehow, was taking an interest in his land. The next day, as the drone flew overhead again, John finally decided to do something about it. He didn't know what he could do, but he figured a quick confrontation was better than letting the problem linger. After all, it wasn't like he could just go up and knock on doors to ask about it. The rural town he lived in was quiet, and most of the people in town were friendly, but this felt different. This felt like a violation of privacy. Whoever's flying that thing, they're gonna know I'm not happy about it. He muttered under his breath as he grabbed his hat and marched out of his farmhouse. He looked up again. The drone was now circling above the barn, its little blades spinning noisily. John watched it for a few seconds, his mind racing. He didn't want to go in guns blazing, but he couldn't just ignore it either. After all, his property was his livelihood. What if it was interfering with his livestock or his crops? He couldn't afford to have his farm disrupted by something as trivial as a drone. The next day, John noticed something strange. The drone didn't just hover. It was flying in a pattern almost as though it was trying to map out the land. It darted from one side of the property to the other, its small frame blending into the sky. Whoever was piloting it seemed to be methodical, almost like they knew exactly where they were going. John frowned. Something about this felt off. It wasn't just a random hobbyist having fun with their drone. This was someone with a purpose, and that made John uneasy. It was then that he decided he needed to figure out who was behind the drone and why it was hovering over his farm so frequently. But how? He wasn't exactly a technology expert. He didn't even own a drone himself. All he knew was that drones weren't just toys, they were tools, and someone was using one above his property. As if on cue, the drone whizzed by again. But this time John could see something else. A woman standing in the distance. She was just outside the fence holding a controller in her hands. She looked relaxed, almost as though she were enjoying the view, as the drone darted across the sky. John's first instinct was to walk over and ask her what she was doing. But he hesitated. There was something about the whole situation that made him pause. Was it really just a friendly hobby? Or was there something more going on here? He decided to watch her for a while longer, thinking he could learn more from observing than by jumping straight into a confrontation. Over the next few days, he watched the woman from a distance. She didn't seem like a regular farmer. In fact, she seemed to come from town, where people were more likely to have fancy gadgets like drones. John saw her a few more times, always with the same controller in her hands, flying the same drone over his fields. John couldn't take it anymore. He had to know who this woman was and why she kept flying drones over his farm, so he made up his mind to confront her. He would go down to the fence, ask her to stop, and if she didn't, well, then he would figure out what his options were. On the 5th day, John approached the fence, stepping cautiously across the tall grass. As he got closer, he saw the woman standing there again, the drone hovering just above her head. He cleared his throat and raised a hand. "Excuse me," John called out. The woman looked up, her eyebrows raising in surprise. "Yes?" she asked, holding the controller with both hands. John took a deep breath. "I've noticed your drone flying over my property. I don't mind a little bit of curiosity, but it's been happening every day now. I'd appreciate it if you could stop." The woman blinked. "Oh, I didn't realize it was bothering you. I'm just trying to get some good footage for my photography project. I thought this was a great spot." John stood his ground, but his frustration started to simmer. "It's not about the footage. It's about my privacy. This is my farm, and I'd like it to stay that way." The woman looked apologetic but seemed undeterred. "I understand. I'll keep it in mind, but the drone's harmless. It's just for fun." John clenched his jaw. He didn't want to escalate things, but the more he thought about it, the more he realized something wasn't right. Why was she flying the drone so often? Why was she spending so much time above his land? But before he could say anything else, the woman smiled. "Well, I'll tell you what, if I'm bothering you, I can stop. I'll take it somewhere else. You can have your peace." John hesitated for a moment. He wanted to trust her, but something still nagged at the back of his mind. Something told him that this wasn't just a harmless hobby. But for now, he decided to take her at her word. "All right, just please keep it down," John said, turning to walk back to his farm. As he walked away, his mind raced. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was just a harmless hobby after all. But deep down, John knew there was something more to this, and he wasn't going to let it slide. Not while it felt like his peace and his privacy were at stake. And little did Karen know John had a secret that would soon change everything. He wasn't just a farmer. He worked for the FAA, the Federal Aviation Administration, and he was about to ground her drones once and for all. The next few days were calm. John went back to his routine, the steady rhythm of farm life easing his thoughts. He worked in the fields, tended to the animals, and even got a few crops ready for the market. The weather was warm, the skies clear, and the farm felt peaceful again. But in the back of his mind, something kept nagging at him. The drone was gone for a while, but John wasn't sure if it would stay gone. He kept his eyes on the skies, looking for any sign that the woman, whose name he still didn't know, would return with her buzzing little toy. He wasn't sure why it bothered him so much. Maybe it was just the principle of the thing. His farm was his own, and he didn't like the idea of anyone, no matter their intentions, intruding on it without permission. And then, as if on cue, the drone returned. It wasn't subtle. It buzzed loudly, cutting through the air as it soared overhead. John looked up and saw it, the same sleek black drone with flashing lights darting through the sky like it owned the place. John's jaw tightened. He had tried to be reasonable. He had even spoken to the woman, told her that her drone was disrupting his peace. Yet here it was again. No explanation. No apology. Just the same drone, flying over his property without a second thought. This time, though, John was prepared. He didn't just see the drone and get frustrated. No, he had a plan now. He was going to end this, and he was going to do it quietly, without getting into any messy arguments. John was not just a farmer. He worked for the FAA, the Federal Aviation Administration. It was a job that required him to monitor the skies, especially when it came to drones. He wasn't just any FAA worker either. He was a drone regulations officer, someone who had the power to enforce the rules that governed drone flights across the country. It was a job that gave him authority over the skies, and now that authority was going to be put to use. John knew he couldn't just walk up to the woman and demand she stop flying her drone. She might not take him seriously, and the situation could escalate. Instead, he would do what he did best, work quietly from behind the scenes. As the drone hovered above his crops, John reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He tapped a few buttons, his fingers moving swiftly across the screen. Within moments, he was connected to the FAA's drone tracking system. The system allowed him to access real-time data on drone locations, flight paths, and even the identities of drone operators. He typed in the necessary information, using his special access privileges to locate the drone he had seen. The screen flickered, and a small map appeared. It showed the drone's exact location, hovering above John's farm. The map indicated that the drone was flying within restricted airspace, a violation of the law. In fact, the drone was too close to a no-fly zone, an area designated for agricultural safety. John smiled to himself. This was the moment he had been waiting for. With a few more taps, he was able to send a signal to the drone's flight controller, temporarily shutting down its engines. It was a simple process, but one that would have a huge impact. The drone would lose power and fall gently to the ground. The woman flying it would have no idea what had happened. John waited. He watched as the drone, still high in the sky, suddenly faltered. The buzzing sound died and the drone wobbled before falling in a steady descent. It landed softly on the ground just beyond the edge of John's field. He didn't move. He didn't need to. His job was done. Moments later, he saw the woman from the distance walking toward the spot where the drone had landed. She was looking around, probably confused. John stayed hidden behind a cluster of trees, watching her every move. When she reached the fallen drone, she crouched down, inspecting it carefully. She fiddled with the controller, trying to figure out what had happened. John could see her frustration from where he stood. She pressed buttons, checked the drone's battery, and muttered to herself. "Come on, work," she said, her voice filled with disbelief. But nothing happened. The drone wouldn't start. John's action had done its job. The FAA's system had remotely grounded it, and there was no easy way for her to restart it without the proper equipment. For a moment, John felt a sense of satisfaction. But then he remembered, this wasn't just about the drone. It was about the principal, his farm, his privacy. The woman stood up, holding the broken drone in her hands. She looked around once more, probably wondering if there was some other explanation for her sudden loss of power. John knew she'd be puzzled for a while, but he also knew that she'd have to deal with it. And if she continued, there was a lot more where that came from. The next day, the woman came back. This time, she wasn't alone. She brought a few tools with her, determined to fix the problem. John watched from a distance, hidden from view. He didn't know what she was thinking, but he had a feeling she wouldn't stop. He had made his point, but now she was pushing back. He walked to the fence, his boots crunching on the dirt path. The woman noticed him as he approached, and her eyes widened in surprise. "Hey," she called out, holding the drone in one hand. "What's going on? I've tried to fix it, but I can't get it to work. Do you have any idea what happened?" John stopped at the fence, looking her straight in the eyes. He could see the frustration and confusion in her expression. This was it, the moment to finally explain everything. "You're breaking the law," he said simply, his voice calm and steady. "I work for the FAA, and I noticed your drone was flying in restricted airspace. It's not just an inconvenience, it's a violation of federal regulations." The woman blinked. She seemed taken aback, but John wasn't finished. "I don't want any trouble," he continued. "But if you keep flying drones over my property without permission, I'll keep grounding them. It's not just about my farm, it's about safety. Those drones could cause problems. You could cause problems." The woman looked down at the broken drone in her hands, then back at John. She seemed to understand, though it took a moment for her to fully grasp what had just happened. Her face softened and she let out a deep sigh. "I didn't know," she admitted. "I just thought it was a harmless hobby. I didn't realize there were laws about this kind of thing." John nodded. "Most people don't, but it's serious. You can't fly drones in certain areas without permission. It's for everyone's safety." There was a long silence before she spoke again. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cause any trouble." "I'll stop. I promise." John nodded, satisfied with the resolution. "Good. And if you want to fly drones legally, you can look into getting certified. There's a process." She smiled, a little embarrassed but grateful. "I'll do that. Thanks for being patient with me." With that, she packed up her things and walked back toward her car, the drone in tow. As John stood there, watching her leave, he couldn't help but feel a sense of relief. The problem was solved, and his farm was once again his own. John turned and walked back toward his fields. The air was still and the sky was clear. It was a peaceful day again, just the way he liked it.